She was 19 years old. She was standing in the farmyard of her family's home in Brittany, France. American soldiers had just liberated her village 3 days earlier. She had waved at them from the road. She had cheered. On the evening of August 10th, 1944, 2 of those same soldiers came back. They were drunk, they had rifles, and they wanted a woman. What happened next, her mother wrote down in a letter the same night, in neat handwriting on 2 pages of paper. She folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and told no one. She wrote at the top, "So nothing is forgotten." That letter stayed in the drawer for 80 years. Her daughter, Amy, now 99 years old, opened it in 2024, and when she read her mother's words out loud for the first time, her voice broke. "Oh, Mother, how you suffered, and me too. I think about this every day." What you are about to hear is not a story about the enemy. It is a story about the liberators, about what the United States Army did to the women of France after D-Day, about what the Army knew, what it covered up, and how it chose which men to hang and which men to protect. This story was classified. It was buried. It was kept from the families of the victims, from the American public, and from history. Until now. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. The largest seaborne invasion in the history of warfare. Nearly 1 million American, British, Canadian and French soldiers poured onto the coast of France in the weeks following D-Day. The objective? Push the Germans back. Liberate Europe. End the war. For the people of Normandy and Brittany, the Americans arrived as heroes. Villages came out into the streets. Women threw flowers. Children ran alongside the trucks. After 4 years of German occupation, 4 years of fear, rationing, forced labor and deportations, the Americans represented everything the occupation was not. Freedom, safety, deliverance. In the village of Montours, a small farming community in Brittany, 19-year-old Aimée Dupré stood in the road and cheered with everyone else. The soldiers waved back. They threw chocolate and cigarettes. They smiled. 3 days later, 2 of them came back to her family's farm after dark. August 10th, 1944, evening. 2 American GIs arrived at the farmhouse. They were drunk. They fired their rifles in the direction of Aimé's father. The bullets tore through his cap, missing his head by inches. A warning, a demonstration of what would happen if anyone tried to stop what came next. They looked at 19-year-old Aimée. Her mother stepped forward. Aimée Élodie Honoré was in her 40s. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the 2 soldiers with their rifles, and she made the only calculation a mother can make in that moment. She agreed to go with them instead. "They took me to a field," she wrote in her letter, "and took turns raping me, 4 times each." While it happened, her daughter stood in the farmhouse and waited, not knowing whether her mother would come back alive, not knowing whether they would hear a shot in the dark, not knowing anything except that her mother had walked into the night to protect her. Her mother came back before dawn. She said nothing. She sat down. She picked up a pen, and she wrote every detail of what had happened in a letter addressed to no one, sealed it and put it in a drawer, so nothing is forgotten. The family told no one. In the France of 1944, there was no language for what had happened. The Americans were the liberators. To accuse a liberator was to betray the liberation. To speak was to be disbelieved, dismissed, or worse, blamed. So they were silent. 30 miles away, in the village of Plabennec, near the port of Brest, another family was not given the chance to be silent. August 20th, 1944. Night. A single American soldier arrived at the farmhouse of the Tournellec family. He broke down the door. Inside were 47-year-old Eugène Tournellec, his wife, and his 17-year-old daughter, Catherine. The soldier wanted Catherine. Eugène Tournellec stood in his way. The soldier shot him dead in his own doorway. 9-year-old Jeanne Tournellec, Catherine's younger sister, was in the house when it happened. 80 years later, at the age of 89, she described it to AFP journalists. "I remember it as if it was yesterday." The soldier raped Catherine Tournellec in the farmhouse where her father's body lay. Jeanne ran to the nearest American garrison to report what had happened. The soldier was eventually identified as Private William Mack, 34 years old, from South Carolina. He was court-martialed by the United States Army, convicted of rape and murder, and publicly hanged in the village of Plabennec in February 1945. French mayors were instructed to invite civilians to watch. The hanging of Private William Mack was presented to the people of Brittany as proof that the American army held itself accountable, that justice had been done. But the story of who was being held accountable, and who was not, is where the truth becomes something far more disturbing than a single crime. By the late summer of 1944, reports of rape by American soldiers had reached the desk of General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Free French Forces High Command had sent a formal letter of complaint to the Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force. Local mayors were writing to military commanders, describing a situation that had become, in the words of one Le Havre citizen, a regime of terror imposed by bandits in uniform. 152 American soldiers were eventually put on trial for rape in France in 1944 and 1945. Of those 152 men, 139 were black. Black soldiers made up approximately 10% of the total American fighting force in Europe. The United States Army's response to the wave of rape accusations was not to investigate all perpetrators equally. It was, according to historian Mary Louise Roberts of the University of Wisconsin, a calculated decision made at the command level. Roberts found notes from an Army command meeting in the late summer of 1944, in which officers discussed how to handle the crisis of rape accusations against American soldiers. Their decision? Make it a black problem, not an American problem. They could blame African Americans, Roberts said, based on the belief that they were hypersexual and violent, and thus exonerate white American soldiers from accusations of rape. White soldiers were largely members of mobile units. They moved constantly and were difficult to locate after a crime. Black soldiers were mostly assigned to stationary support units. They stayed in one place. They were easier to find. If a French woman accused a white American soldier of rape, the AFP report noted, he could easily get away with it because he had never stayed near the scene. Of the 29 soldiers publicly executed in France for rape during the liberation, 25 were black. The rapes committed by white American soldiers in France during this period were, in the words of historian J. Robert Lilly of Northern Kentucky University, largely unpunished, uninvestigated, and unrecorded. Lilly spent years studying 14,000 pages of classified military records at the National Archives in Washington. His conclusion: American GIs committed an estimated 3,500 rapes in France between June 1944 and the end of the war. The real number, he believed, was far higher, because most victims never reported what had happened. Because they had learned, very quickly, what reporting meant. It meant being disbelieved. It meant being told the liberators do not do such things. It meant watching the army investigate, and then watching the army decide which men were responsible and which men were not. For the Dupré family in Montours, there was no trial. No soldier was ever identified, charged, or prosecuted for what happened to Aimé Eulaudet Honoré in that field on the night of August 10, 1944. Her daughter kept the letter in the drawer for 80 years. She took it out for the first time in 2024, when an AFP journalist came to ask about what had happened during the liberation. She sat down at a table. She unfolded the paper. She read her mother's handwriting. They took me to a field and took turns raping me, 4 times each. Aimée Dupré, 99 years old, stopped reading. Her voice broke. "Oh, Mother, how you suffered." She looked up. "My mother sacrificed herself to protect me," she said. "While they raped her in the night, we waited, not knowing whether she would come back alive, not knowing whether they would shoot her dead." Her mother survived. She came home before dawn. She never spoke of it again. She wrote it down instead. So nothing is forgotten. Eugène Tournellec survived too. She married. She had children. She carried what happened to her in that farmhouse and what happened to her father in that doorway for the rest of her life in silence. In 2013, on her deathbed, she told her children what had happened, one by one. She asked each of them, "You believe me, don't you?" She died without ever seeing her father's name in a history book. In August 2024, on the 80th anniversary of the events of that summer, Catherine's daughters gathered at their grandfather's grave in Plabennec. The mayor came. 2 French veterans carried flags. They laid flowers at the spot where Eugène Tournellec was buried, a man who stood in a doorway to protect his daughter and was shot dead for it. His grandson, Jean-Pierre Salum, holds a local history book about the village during World War II. The book mentions horses that were killed during the fighting. It does not mention Eugène Tournellec. "He was not a hero of France," his granddaughter Michelle said, standing at his grave, "but he is our hero." Behind the graveyard, there is a spot where Private William Mack was hanged in February 1945. The army brought the French villagers to watch. Justice, they were told. Accountability. What the army did not tell them, that 139 of the 152 men tried for rape were black. That the command had made a decision to blame black soldiers in order to protect the reputation of white Americans. That the system was not about justice, it was about optics, about managing an image, about choosing which truth the liberated people of France were allowed to know. The full truth, the classified reports, the command meeting notes, the real numbers, stayed locked in the National Archives in Washington for decades. Robert Lilly found them. Mary Louise Roberts found them. They published what they found. The United States Army has never formally acknowledged what its command structure decided in the summer of 1944. The women of Montours and Plabennec waited 80 years for anyone to ask what happened. Most of them did not live long enough to be asked. The ones who did finally answered. So nothing is forgotten.